Have you ever spent your own blood and sweat to buy a first-class ticket to your family's betrayal? I did exactly that. You might think the worst pain is being erased from a 2-week luxury vacation you funded yourself. But the true nightmare lies in why they did it. Watch closely how cruelly a family can smile, and how an obedient daughter orchestrates the ultimate revenge the second she stops being their backup credit card. Hello to the wonderful audience of Daisy Revenge Stories. I am so deeply grateful you have chosen to spend your time with us today. As you may know, YouTube recently demonetized our channel, leaving us entirely without the budget to keep operating and producing content. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us with a donation of just $1 so our channel has the budget to pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to cover their living expenses and continue creating these incredible stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on the donation screen or by clicking the donation link located in the description box or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you so much. My name is Isla Murphy. I am 32 years old, working as a senior project manager at the pharmaceutical giant Novartis Synthetics. The morning it all shattered. The Boston fog was overwhelmingly thick, clinging to the historic brick facades and damp asphalt like a wet, heavy shroud. It was the kind of gray, miserable morning that made you want to stay in bed. But I had been awake since 3 in the morning. For the past 12 months, I had bled myself dry, saving every bonus and cutting every personal expense to put together the ultimate luxury itinerary to Monaco and the south of France for my parents, Arthur and Beatrice, and myself. At exactly 5 in the morning, I pulled my SUV into their familiar suburban driveway. I held 2 trays of artisanal hot coffee in my hands, while a premium leather-bound itinerary rested proudly on my passenger seat. I felt a rare, glowing spark of filial pride. I was finally giving my parents the world they always pretended they belonged to. I popped the trunk of my car, the hydraulic hiss cutting sharply through the dead morning air. I stood by the rear bumper, waiting for my aging parents to walk out with their modest suitcases, ready for our family adventure. Instead, the heavy oak front door swung open, and stepping out onto the porch was not my mother or father. It was Julian, my younger brother, the absolute golden boy of the family. Trailing closely behind him was his new fiancée, Sloane, an heiress who hailed from a family of ultra-wealthy shipping magnates. Together, they were dragging a literal mountain of heavy designer luggage down the porch steps. My parents followed right behind them, but they were dressed in their standard weekend bathrobes, clearly not prepared for any international flight. Beatrice glided down the concrete steps with the serene, highly calculated smile of a veteran politician. She reached out and placed her cold hands over mine. "Isla, darling," she murmured, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of guilt or hesitation. "We had a slight change of plans. Julian desperately needs this trip to make a good impression on Sloane's family in Monaco. You understand, do you not? You are already so successful and perfectly independent. You can afford to yield your spot just this once, for the sake of your brother's future." I slowly looked past her to find my father. Arthur stood rigid on the porch, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes glued firmly to a meaningless crack in the driveway concrete. He could not even muster the courage to look at his own daughter. Meanwhile, Julian simply shrugged his shoulders. He reached right past me, opening the passenger door to snatch the first-class tickets from the leather folder as if taking them was his absolute birthright. This was his grand reward, apparently, for a lifetime of mediocrity and for bravely trying to launch a tech startup after filing for bankruptcy 3 times. A normal, sane person would have screamed until their throat gave out. A normal person would have thrown the scalding coffee onto the driveway, snatched her tickets back, and wept at the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her own flesh and blood. I did none of those things. Instead, I felt a distinct, physical sensation deep inside my chest, a clean, icy snap, like a dead branch breaking off a winter tree in the freezing wind. The anger was so absolute, so suffocating, that it instantly crystallized into pure mechanical calm. Of course, I said, my voice completely flat and hollow. I quietly loaded their massive designer bags into my trunk, lifting the heavy leather with numb hands. I opened the rear car doors for Julian and Sloane, closed them softly, and slid into the driver's seat. The long drive to Logan Airport was entirely engulfed in a suffocating, toxic silence, at least from my end of the vehicle. In the back seat, however, Sloane was practically vibrating with innocent excitement. She leaned forward, her massive diamond engagement ring catching the dim, passing streetlights. "I just cannot believe how amazing your parents are." "Isla," Sloane chirped, her voice dripping with genuine gratitude. "Julian told me Arthur and Beatrice so generously paid for this entire luxury trip, a private yacht charter, an ocean view suite in Monaco. It is just beyond generous. I feel so incredibly blessed to be marrying into such a wonderful, supportive family." My hands tightened around the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. They had not just stolen my trip. They had blatantly, shamelessly stolen the credit for it. Every single cent of my hard-earned money, every exhausting late-night shift at Novara Synthetics, had been completely erased and magically rebranded as Arthur and Beatrice's generational wealth. Julian sat right next to her, staring blankly out the dark window, not saying a single word to correct her misconception. I pulled up to the bustling curb at the International Departures Terminal. I got out and helped them unload the heavy bags onto a metal luggage cart. As Julian and Sloane walked ahead toward the sliding glass doors, Beatrice pulled me into a brief, suffocating hug. "Thank you for always being the understanding child," she whispered directly into my ear. I smiled back at her. It was a hollow, perfectly constructed expression of compliance. I nodded once, I turned around, got back into my car, and drove to the upper level of the airport parking garage. I parked my car facing the runway and sat there in the heavy silence. I waited for exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. I watched their specific flight lift off the gray tarmac, tearing through the heavy Boston clouds, taking my family and my savings across the Atlantic Ocean. Only when the massive airplane became a tiny, invisible speck in the sky did I finally turn the key in the ignition and drive myself back to an empty home. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of gray concrete and flashing traffic lights. When I finally unlocked my front door and stepped inside, the absolute silence of my own space wrapped around me. I did not shed a single tear. My eyes were entirely dry, my pulse beating in a steady, unhurried rhythm. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for the past 3 decades was completely gone, replaced by a terrifying, clinical detachment. I walked straight into the kitchen. The stainless steel espresso machine hummed to life under my fingertips. I methodically ground the dark roasted beans, packed the portafilter, and watched the thick, dark liquid drip into my porcelain cup. I took a slow sip. The bitter heat grounded me. I carried the cup to my home office, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and opened my sleek silver laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I navigated directly to the exclusive portal for my black credit card. The screen loaded, displaying the meticulously planned itinerary that was meant to be my ultimate gift to my parents. Now, it was nothing more than a digital hit list. I clicked on the transportation tab first. There it was. The booking for the customized Mercedes-Maybach limousine, scheduled to wait on the private tarmac at Nice Airport with chilled vintage champagne. The driver had my name on his manifest. My finger hovered over the trackpad. With one sharp click, I hit cancel. A pop-up box asked if I was sure I wanted to forfeit the deposit. I clicked confirm. The luxury vehicle vanished from the system. Next was the accommodation. I opened the reservation for the 5-star luxury hotel in the heart of Monaco. I had booked their grand penthouse suite, a breathtaking expanse of marble floors, velvet drapes, and a wraparound balcony offering an uninterrupted view of the Mediterranean Sea. The cost for a 14-night stay was an astronomical sum that had taken me nearly 2 years to accumulate. I stared at the confirmation number for 3 seconds. Then, I selected the cancellation option. The system processed the request, instantly terminating the reservation and initiating a massive refund process back to my primary card. I did not stop there. I moved on to the culinary reservations. I canceled the private chef who was supposed to cook a personalized welcome dinner. I canceled the reservations at 3 different exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants where waitlists were usually 6 months long. The system devoured my cancellations one by one, erasing every trace of the elite status my brother and parents were banking on. The final item on the chopping block was the centerpiece of the entire vacation: the private, 70-foot luxury yacht charter I had secured for a 3-day cruise along the French Riviera. Sloane had been so incredibly excited about it in the car. I vividly remembered her sparkling eyes. I felt a fleeting second of pity for the innocent girl who was about to be deeply humiliated, but she needed to see the truth about the family she was marrying into. I clicked the red cancel button. The yacht booking disappeared into the digital void. I kept only one thing intact. I left their return flights completely untouched. I wanted to ensure they absolutely made it to Europe. If I canceled their outgoing flights, they would simply be turned away at the boarding gate in Boston, which would be far too easy. No, they needed to cross the ocean. They needed to land in a foreign country, utterly exhausted, expecting a kingdom, only to step out of the airport and crash directly into cold, hard reality with absolutely zero services waiting to greet them. As the massive refunds began to process, I opened a completely separate, high-yield savings account at a different financial institution. I systematically transferred every single refunded dollar out of the Black Card account and into this new, secure vault. Once the transfer was complete, I picked up my phone and dialed my personal banking concierge. "Good morning. This is Isla. I need to immediately freeze the supplemental credit card ending in 4729. I instructed the representative. "Certainly. Miss Murphy, the card issued to Arthur and Beatrice," the polite voice asked. "Yes, freeze it permanently. Report it as compromised if you have to. Under no circumstances should any transaction be authorized on that card starting from this exact minute." "Consider it done. The card is now locked." I hung up the phone. I had given them that backup card 3 years ago, explicitly for medical emergencies. I knew exactly what they would try to do the moment they realized the penthouse was gone. They would try to swipe that card to save face in front of the billionaire heiress. Not anymore. The Bank of Isla was permanently closed for business. Almost instantly, my phone screen illuminated. A rapid succession of automated text messages from various elite travel agencies flooded my notifications, confirming that every single luxury service had been successfully terminated. I watched the screen glow in the dim light of my office. Exactly 9 hours later, the afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across my living room floor. I knew their flight was scheduled to touch down in France right about now, like clockwork. The bright screen of my phone erupted. The caller identification flashed with Julian's name. The international ringtone pierced the quiet atmosphere of my apartment. I did not answer. I stared at his name pulsing on the glass screen. Then, I reached out, slid the silent switch on the side of the device, and flipped the phone face down onto the cool wooden table. I walked into my bathroom, turned the brass handles of my large soaking tub, and let the steaming hot water rush in. I poured in a generous amount of lavender bath salts. I stepped into the scalding heat, sinking deep into the water until it reached my chin. I closed my eyes, let out a long, slow breath, and finally allowed myself to relax. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight was streaming beautifully through my sheer bedroom curtains. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling a profound sense of physical lightness. My apartment was utterly peaceful, filled only with the faint, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and finally flipped my phone over to face the ceiling. The screen instantly lit up, flooded with an avalanche of notifications. There were exactly 87 missed calls. My voicemail inbox was completely full. The notifications were a chaotic mix of frantic texts, audio messages, and desperate alerts spanning the entire night. It was an absolute digital symphony of panic playing out across the Atlantic Ocean. I sat down at my kitchen island and tapped the first voicemail. It was from Julian. recorded shortly after they must have landed. His tone was sharp, arrogant, and fully accustomed to commanding me. Isla, pick up your phone. The private driver you booked is not at the arrivals gate. Sloane's parents just landed on their private jet and are waiting to follow us to the hotel. Fix this right now. I deleted the message and moved to the next one. Recorded an hour later, the arrogance had entirely vanished, replaced by breathless, high-pitched panic. Isla, what did you do? The hotel is saying our reservation does not exist. We are standing in the lobby with Sloane's billionaire parents, looking like absolute fools. Answer your damn phone. By the fifth message, my golden boy brother was completely reduced to a pathetic, weeping mess. Please, Isla, I am begging you. Sloane is crying. Her father is staring at us like we are garbage. Please, just book something. I will pay you back. I swear. Just do not do this to me. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head at the sheer audacity of his promises. He had filed for bankruptcy 3 times. He could not pay me back for a sandwich, let alone a penthouse in Monaco. The next voice note was from Beatrice. She was not just crying. She was full-blown hyperventilating. Through her hysterical sobs, I managed to piece together the beautiful, chaotic picture of their downfall. She wailed about how they were trapped at the airport for hours with Sloane's incredibly wealthy family. There was no customized luxury vehicle, no red carpet treatment. When the horrific realization set in that they had no accommodation, Arthur had bravely marched up to the concierge desk of a nearby luxury resort, attempting to salvage his bruised ego, but because it was peak tourist season, the nightly rates had multiplied by 4. When Arthur confidently slammed down the emergency backup credit card I had given him, the machine loudly beeped and declined the transaction in front of everyone. Beatrice sobbed that they had been publicly humiliated in front of the shipping magnates they were desperately trying to impress. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened a social media application and searched for Sloane's profile. Her page, usually curated with photos of high-end boutiques and private aviation, featured a brand new, highly depressing story update. I clicked on it. The video showed a grim, dimly lit room with peeling floral wallpaper and a flickering fluorescent light buzzing ominously overhead. Sloane had added a tiny, sad, crying face emoji to the corner of the screen. I did a quick search on the location tag. It was a notoriously run-down budget motel located 40 kilometers away from the glamorous city center of Monaco. The grand illusion of Julian's equal social standing had spectacularly evaporated before they even unpacked their fake designer luggage. The magnificent sandcastle they built on my dime had been washed away by the first wave of reality. The final voicemail belonged to my father. Even in the face of total, humiliating defeat, Arthur could not let go of his patriarchal authority. His voice was trembling with rage, leaning heavily into the toxic, manipulative tactics he had used on me since childhood. Isla Murphy, you listen to me, Arthur growled into the receiver. You are to call your bank and unfreeze that credit card this exact second. How dare you do this to your own flesh and blood? Are you trying to destroy your brother's lifelong happiness? You are being incredibly selfish. Fix this right now, or do not ever bother speaking to us again. The ultimatum hung in the air of my quiet kitchen. In the past, the threat of their withdrawal of affection would have sent me into a desperate frenzy of people-pleasing. Today, it sounded like the punchline to a terrible joke. I opened a new text message and added Arthur, Beatrice, and Julian to a single group chat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a second before I typed out my final response. The luxury trip was my gift to Mom and Dad, not a prop for Julian to deceive his wife's family. Pay for your own vanity. I hit send, before any of them could frantically type back a response or unleash another barrage of verbal abuse. I went into my phone settings. I selected Arthur's contact and pressed block. I did the same for Beatrice. Finally, I blocked Julian. A profound, heavy silence settled over my phone, and by extension, my life. I stood up, stretched my legs, and walked into my bedroom to pack a small overnight bag. I had an appointment for a 90-minute deep tissue massage at an exclusive local spa, followed by a quiet, luxurious weekend getaway just for myself. As I drove out of my apartment complex, the warm breeze blowing through my open car windows felt completely different. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air, thoroughly relishing the absolute joy of resigning from my lifelong position as the unpaid janitor for my family's endless messes. 5 days passed since I effectively excommunicated my family. The peace in my apartment was intoxicating. I spent my evenings reading and my mornings running without the constant anxiety of a manufactured family crisis looming over my head. But on the 6th afternoon, the universe decided to deliver the final, missing piece of the puzzle. I was sorting through a stack of forwarded mail. When I bought my apartment 2 years ago, some of my older accounts still had my parents' house listed as my primary residence, so the post office occasionally forwarded stray envelopes to my new address. Buried between a glossy magazine and a utility bill was a harsh, stark white envelope. It was not addressed to me. It was addressed to Arthur and Beatrice. The return address belonged to a notoriously aggressive corporate debt collection agency, the kind that only stepped in when massive, secured loans went into severe default. A cold prickle of unease washed over my skin. My parents were obsessed with their financial image. They worshipped their credit scores and constantly bragged about their fiscal responsibility to anyone who would listen. A final notice from a debt collector made absolutely no sense. Curiosity, sharp and undeniable, overrode my sense of privacy. I slid my index finger under the paper flap and tore it open. The document inside was a formal notice of intent to initiate foreclosure proceedings. My breath caught in my throat. I read the text again, tracing the printed words with my finger to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. It stated with brutal clarity that they were 4 months behind on payments for a massive second mortgage. My project manager instincts, the exact same analytical skills that earned me my senior title at Novaris Synthetics, instantly kicked into high gear. I marched to my home office, opened my laptop, and bypassed social media entirely. I logged directly into the county clerk's public property database. I typed in the address of my childhood home, paid the nominal processing fee with my credit card, and pulled the complete deed history. The screen quickly populated with dense legal jargon. There it was, sitting in plain sight, 8 months ago. Arthur and Beatrice had taken out a second mortgage, extracting nearly every single cent of equity they had built over 30 years of homeownership. They had pulled out hundreds of thousands of dollars in cold, hard cash. Where did the money go? They had not renovated the house. They had not purchased new luxury vehicles or taken any exotic trips prior to the one I funded. The timeline gnawed at my brain. 8 months ago, that was precisely when Julian's latest technology startup mysteriously folded overnight, and right around the exact time he suddenly began dating Sloane, the shipping heiress. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the state and federal civil court records. I typed in Julian's full legal name. The search icon spun for a fraction of a second before delivering a devastating, undeniable list of results. There were multiple civil lawsuits filed against my brother, along with a terrifying public docket indicating a recently closed investigation by federal financial regulators. I downloaded the public complaints, scrolling rapidly through hundreds of pages of legal jargon, witness statements, and banking ledgers. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Julian's third business venture was not a failing tech startup. It was an unregistered cryptocurrency scheme. He had promised double-digit returns to early investors, using new capital to pay off older debts. It was a classic, textbook Ponzi scheme. When the market dipped and the investors demanded their money back, the entire operation imploded. The federal authorities had been moments away from hitting him with felony wire fraud charges, which carried a mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together, forming a picture so incredibly ugly it made me physically nauseous. Arthur and Beatrice had not taken out that massive mortgage for home improvements. They had liquidated their entire life savings and put the roof over their heads on the line to pay confidential legal settlements and financial restitution. They had literally bought their golden boy out of a federal indictment. But that left them drowning in a massive ocean of debt they could never possibly repay on their fixed retirement pensions. They needed a miracle. They needed an influx of massive, unquestioning wealth. They needed Sloane. The entire European vacation, my blood, my sweat, my sacrificed weekends, it was never meant to be a loving family holiday. Arthur and Beatrice never had any intention of boarding that airplane. That was exactly why they were standing on the porch in their bathrobes that foggy morning. They had orchestrated the driveway handoff perfectly, knowing my deeply ingrained habit of quiet compliance would prevent me from causing a screaming scene in front of the neighbors. My luxurious itinerary was nothing more than a desperate, carefully constructed theatrical prop. They needed to project the image of an incredibly wealthy old money family to convince Sloane's billionaire parents that Julian was an equal. Once the marriage was legally finalized, Julian would undoubtedly manipulate his naive new bride into paying off his parents' secret second mortgage under the guise of a brilliant investment or a temporary cash flow issue. The sheer, calculated evil of their plan completely knocked the wind out of me. The betrayal tasted metallic in my mouth. I pushed my ergonomic chair back from the desk and stared blankly at the polished wooden floor. For 32 years of my life, I had desperately chased their approval. I thought if I was just successful enough, generous enough, understanding enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Julian. The naked, brutal truth was staring right back at me from the glowing laptop screen. In their eyes, I was never a daughter to be loved or protected. I was simply a zero-interest credit facility. I was an oblivious beast of burden, a convenient, disposable tool utilized to silently pave over the catastrophic criminal failures of their precious son. But as the initial wave of profound, suffocating grief washed over me, a completely different, much more powerful emotion rose up from my chest to take its place. It was a dark, electric sense of absolute triumph. When I sat at this very desk and clicked cancel on those luxury cars, the penthouse, and the private yacht, I thought I was merely punishing them for leaving me behind. I had absolutely no idea of the magnificent magnitude of my actions. By canceling that trip and freezing my credit, I had not just embarrassed them, I had unwittingly detonated their entire multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Without the illusion of my wealth, the marriage would never happen. Without the marriage, there was no massive dowry. Without the dowry, the bank was going to take their house. I had pulled the single load-bearing thread, and their entire corrupt empire was collapsing into dust before my very eyes. I refused to spend another second crying over people who viewed my existence as nothing more than a financial asset. I closed the court documents and opened a brand new tab. I had an enormous amount of refunded cash sitting perfectly idle in my new, high-yield savings account. It was time I finally spent it on the only person who actually deserved it. I navigated to a premium airline website. I did not look at destinations in France or Monaco. Instead, I typed in Geneva, Switzerland. I booked a first-class round-trip ticket for one. I secured a reservation at an exclusive, breathtaking alpine resort surrounded by snow-capped peaks, a place entirely inaccessible to anyone without genuine resources. I paid the exorbitant total up front, in full, relishing the highly satisfying sound of the keyboard clicking under my fingers. My family was about to face the devastating, inescapable consequences of their own actions, and I was going to watch it happen from the absolute top of the world. The crisp, biting air of the Swiss Alps was a stark contrast to the suffocating humidity of Boston. I sat on the private cedar terrace of my ultra-luxury resort, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, a glass of full-bodied ruby-red wine resting in my hand. Stretching out before me were miles of majestic, snow-capped mountains piercing the perfectly clear blue sky. For the first time in 32 years, the crushing, invisible weight of familial expectation was entirely gone. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the pure, freezing mountain air, and exhaled decades of carefully conditioned subservience. The freedom tasted sweeter than the expensive vintage wine I was sipping. After 3 days of complete digital detox and profound physical relaxation, I decided it was finally time to check the wreckage. I set my wine glass down on the small table, picked up my phone, and navigated to my blocked contacts list. With a few deliberate taps, I removed the restrictions on my parents and my brother. I also opened my main email application and my messaging platforms. The expected flood of chaotic notifications trickled in, but the very first message that caught my eye was not from my blood relatives. It was a direct message from Sloan. Isla, I do not know how to adequately thank you. The message began. Thank you for not indulging their delusions. By stepping away, you forced them to show their true colors. You saved me from marrying into a family of absolute frauds. The moment your father's card declined and the hotel threw them out, the truth started unraveling. My father had his private investigators run a background check on Julian. We know everything about the federal investigation and the cryptocurrency scam. I have officially called off the engagement. My parents and I flew back to the United States on our jet the very next morning. I wish you nothing but the best. I smiled softly at the screen. The innocent heiress had dodged a massive, devastating bullet, but her swift departure meant Julian, Arthur, and Beatrice were utterly abandoned on the French Riviera. Through a combination of frantic social media updates from Julian's abandoned accounts and desperate voicemails left on my phone, I pieced together their spectacular downfall. Without my black card to fund their champagne tastes, and without Sloane's billionaire parents to blindly foot the bill, my family had hit a terrifying rock bottom. They were stranded in one of the most expensive regions on the planet during peak tourist season. To survive, they had been forced into the ultimate humiliation. Julian had to pawn his meticulously crafted replica luxury watches, and Beatrice had to sell her fake designer leather handbags to local street vendors just to scrape together enough cash for cheap, second-class regional train tickets. They were spending their grand European vacation dragging heavy luggage from one miserable budget hostel to another, eating convenience store sandwiches instead of Michelin-starred dinners. Then, I opened my email inbox. Sitting at the very top was a message from Beatrice. It was an astonishing 3 pages long. For the very first time in my entire existence, my mother did not use a single hollow cliché. There were no manipulative guilt trips about family loyalty, no political smiles hidden behind the text. It was a raw, pathetic confession of their absolute financial ruin. She detailed the second mortgage. She confessed to Julian's catastrophic legal troubles. She admitted that their grand plan to use Sloane's wealth had spectacularly failed, and that they were completely out of money. She ended the lengthy email by begging me, practically crawling through the digital screen, to wire them enough funds to halt the impending bank foreclosure on their house. You are our only hope, Isla. The final line read, Please do not let us end up on the street. I read the 3 pages with a profound, almost eerie indifference. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. The deeply ingrained instinct to throw on my firefighter gear and rush into their burning building was completely dead. This solo journey to Switzerland had taught me a vital lesson. I finally understood that a boundary was not a weapon designed to punish other people. It was simply a sturdy, impenetrable shield built to protect my own peace. Their financial disaster was the direct result of their own greed and deceit, not my lack of generosity. I calmly locked my phone screen. I took another slow sip of my wine, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue while I gazed at the majestic Alpine Valley. I calculated the timeline of their miserable journey home, because I had deliberately left their return flights intact. I knew exactly which day and hour their economy class seats would touch down in Boston. I opened my airline application and booked my own return flight to the United States, timing it so I would arrive back in the city on the exact same afternoon they did. I did not reply to Beatrice's desperate 3-page email. I did not acknowledge Julian's voicemails. Instead, I sent a single, brief text message to the group chat. I will meet you at the house on Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon. I set the phone down, leaned back in my comfortable chair, and let the bright Swiss sun warm my face. The grand finale was approaching, and I was entirely ready for it. I pulled my car into the familiar driveway at exactly 4 in the afternoon on Tuesday. The summer weather in Boston was warm and bright, a complete contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere that had always suffocated me in this place. I walked up the concrete steps and did not bother knocking. I slid my old silver key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The air inside the house felt incredibly stale, thick with the undeniable stench of defeat. I walked into the living room and found the three of them sitting on the faded velvet furniture. They looked absolutely destroyed. The glamorous facade they had projected just 2 weeks ago was completely gone. Arthur and Beatrice looked like they had aged 10 years. Their faces were drawn, their eyes sunken with dark, bruised circles from sleepless nights in budget European train stations. Julian was pacing nervously by the fireplace, wearing a wrinkled, unwashed designer shirt. The moment Julian saw me step into the room, his despair instantly transformed into furious, blind rage. "You ruined my life!" he screamed, his voice cracking violently as he lunged forward, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "You psychotic, selfish bitch! You deliberately set me up to fail. You cost me Sloane. You cost me her family's fortune. I was days away from securing my future. And you burned it all to the ground because you were jealous." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply let him scream until his lungs gave out. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of printed documents. I walked directly to the center of the room and slammed the entire stack onto the heavy glass coffee table. The sharp, violent smack of the paper hitting the glass echoed through the living room like a gunshot. The sudden, aggressive noise instantly killed Julian's screaming fit. The room plunged into a horrifying, suffocating silence. "Read them," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that commanded the entire room. Arthur leaned forward, his hands trembling violently as he picked up the top page. It was the federal court docket detailing Julian's cryptocurrency fraud, followed immediately by the final foreclosure notice on their second mortgage. The last drop of color drained from my father's face. He looked at Beatrice, who instantly brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a pathetic gasp. "You really thought I was that stupid," I said, my voice steady, slicing through the quiet room like a scalpel. "I know absolutely everything. I know about the unregistered securities. I know about the federal investigation. I know that you two secretly mortgaged the only asset you had left in the world to buy your golden boy out of a federal prison sentence." "Isla, please," Beatrice whimpered, tears spilling over her eyelids and running down her cheeks. "Do not interrupt me," I snapped, pointing a firm finger at her. "I spent an entire year working myself into the ground. I bled for every single dollar to buy you that luxury European vacation, and you took my blood, my sweat, and my love, and you used it as a cheap theatrical prop. You used my hard-earned wealth to build a fake empire so Julian could trap an innocent heiress into a marriage she never asked for. You were going to use her dowry to save yourselves, and you used me as the bait." Arthur swallowed hard, his hands shaking so violently he had to drop the papers back onto the table. He looked up at me with desperate, pleading eyes, reaching for the exact same manipulative tactics he had used since my childhood. "We had no choice, Isla," Arthur stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "We are a family. Family must protect each other. If Julian went to prison, it would have destroyed us all. You have to understand." "Family protects each other," I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disgust. "Yes, family protects each other, but you did not protect me. You threw me to the wolves. You used me as a sacrificial lamb to cover up the crimes of a massive fraud. I am a human being. Arthur, I am your daughter, but to you, I am just a financial tool. I am not a gas station for Julian's mistakes. I am not a zero-interest credit facility for your vanity." I reached into my bag one final time and pulled out a single, crisp legal document encased in a blue folder. I tossed it onto the table next to the foreclosure notices. "Before I flew to Switzerland," I explained smoothly, "I contacted a close friend of mine who runs a private financial acquisitions firm. I had his company legally purchase a small secondary lien on this property from your debt collectors. It was just a fraction of your massive debt, but it gives me legal leverage. Right now, I hold the right to accelerate the collection and push you out onto the street immediately." Julian stood frozen, his jaw completely slack, staring at me as if he were looking at a terrifying stranger. However, I continued, tapping the blue folder, that document is a permanent, legally binding waiver. If you, Arthur, and Beatrice sign it right now, you legally renounce any and all future rights to demand financial support, alimony, or assistance from me forever. You sign away your right to ever contact me for money. If you sign it, I will forgive the small fraction of the debt I purchased, giving you perhaps a few extra weeks to pack your belongings before the primary bank inevitably takes this house. Beatrice let out a loud, wretched sob, collapsing against the armrest of the sofa. Julian remained paralyzed, the terrifying reality finally sinking into his thick skull. The obedient, people-pleasing sister they had mocked and exploited for 3 decades was dead. In her place stood a woman holding the absolute power over their immediate ruin. They had permanently lost access to the only true lifeline this family ever had. "Sign it, or I execute the lien tomorrow morning," I stated clearly. I pulled a black ink pen from my bag, dropped it onto the glass table, and turned my back to them. I did not wait to watch them cry. I did not wait for apologies I knew would be entirely fake. I simply walked toward the front door, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, leaving the chaotic, miserable mess exactly where it belonged. I walked down the driveway into the bright, blinding sunlight of Boston. I stopped for a moment, closed my eyes, and took a deep, massive breath of the warm summer air. A genuine, radiant smile broke across my face. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my entire life, completely relieved in the absolute certainty that from this exact second forward, my wealth, my life, and my happiness belonged to only one person, myself. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and listened to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found my journey today empowering or entertaining, please consider helping our channel stay alive. We are entirely demonetized, and we rely on your incredible generosity to keep the lights on. A donation of just $1 helps pay the wonderful staff here, allowing them to feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you to enjoy. You can support us by scanning the donation QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the donation link found in the description box and the pinned comment. Thank you again for your time, your support, and your beautiful energy.